What if someone you loved was brutally murdered and no one could figure out who did it for years? Think about the pain, the frustration, and the endless questions. Who could have done this? Why did this happen? Will we ever find out? For one family, these were not just questions. They were a harsh reality. 4 decades ago, a young woman's life was cut short, and the search for answers seemed to vanish. Even as the years went by, the sadness and the hope for answers never faded. What was hidden in the shadows of that long, unsolved case? And how did the truth finally come to light? One terrible crime in the summer of 1971 shook Burlington, Vermont to its core. It left a dark mark on the town that would last for years. Burlington was known for its beautiful scenery and close-knit community. Life moved slowly there, and everyone was friendly. The city's lively center, which was full of cute shops and cozy cafes, gave off a peaceful vibe that made it seem immune to the crime that happens in bigger cities. People were proud to have their doors open and meet each other with a smile on the streets lined with trees. But on the night of July 19th, those hopes were dashed when a 24-year-old smart and dedicated teacher was found brutally killed in her own apartment. Rita Curran's death was a shocking change from Burlington's normal calm. It was only a short walk from her Brooks Avenue apartment to the University of Vermont. It was in a safe area where people used to take it for granted. People in the neighborhood were shocked to learn that such a horrible crime could happen right in their own backyard. With its beautiful views of Lake Champlain and the Green Mountains, Burlington has always been a great place for nature lovers and people who want to get away from the busyness of modern life. It was thought to be a safe and friendly place because it had a lot of cultural diversity, as shown by its lively art scene and old buildings. The crime scene, which used to be a sign of peace, now had a scary vibe that made people in the town feel less safe. As the investigation went on, Burlington's quiet streets and cute buildings became the background for the desperate search for answers. The town had long been proud of its close-knit community and low crime rate, but now it had to face the truth. Rita Curran's murder was not just a one-off event. It was a stark warning that even places that seem safe can have bad things going on. What happened in that crime will always be remembered by the community. It made Burlington face how fragile its peace was and how complicated justice could be. As quickly as the news of her death spread, people in the area became very afraid and uneasy because they were not used to seeing such violence. Who would do something so horrible and why? As the investigation went on, the case took unexpected turns. There were dead ends, strange connections, and a dark secret that wouldn't be revealed until decades later. This is the story of Rita Curran's life, her sad death, and the murder that no one could figure out for more than 40 years. Not only does the story show the darkness that lives in the corners of a quiet town, but it also shows how people who want to find Rita's killer will never give up. She was born on March 27, 1947 in Burlington, Vermont, into a close-knit family. People in the neighborhood looked up to the Currans and knew how friendly and helpful they were. Rita was the second of 4 children. She was smart, hardworking, and caring, and it seemed like she was destined to spend her time helping others. Rita has always loved learning and been very dedicated to her studies, even when she was very young. She worked hard all through high school and was known as a great student who was always willing to help her teachers and co-workers. She chose to become a teacher because she naturally wanted to help and teach others. Rita went to Trinity College, a small Catholic school in Burlington, after finishing from Mount St. Mary's High School. She continued to do well in school and earned a degree in teaching. Her goal was to become a teacher, and when she got hired to teach 2nd grade at a nearby public school, her dream came true. Rita was loved by her co-workers and students. It was known that she was patient, kind, and paid close attention to each student. She planned lessons, graded papers, and thought of new ways to keep her young students interested for hours on end. Rita did have some fun in her life as well. As a member of the Catholic Daughters of America, a group that gave her a sense of community and purpose outside of school, it played a big role in her life. Rita was dedicated to her job and her faith, but her life did have some problems. It was said that she was shy and quiet, and she preferred to be alone or with her family than with her friends. But her quiet personality hid a deep inner power and a strong dedication to her beliefs. Rita had strong morals and lived her life with honesty and a sense of duty to the people she cared about. Rita was about to start something new in the summer of 1971. She had recently moved out of her parents' house and into a small apartment on Brooks Avenue, which was only a short walk from University of Vermont. Rita had always been close to her family, so this was a big step for her. But she was excited to live her life her own way. Rita shared an apartment with 2 other women. It was simple but cozy, and it gave her a sense of freedom she had never had before. But sadly, this new part of her life would not last long. Rita Curran's bright life was violently cut short on the night of July 19, 1971. Her family, friends, and the whole community would be puzzled by what happened for decades. It was just another summer night in Burlington on July 19, 1971. There was warm outside and streets were quiet. Rita taught summer school all day and then went back to her room on Brooks Avenue. Before they went out for the night, she had a short conversation with her roommates, but when they came back, the flat was very quiet. Just before midnight, one of Rita's roommates came into the flat. There were no signs of trouble, and the lights were off. But when she opened Rita's bedroom door, she saw something that would stay with her forever. Rita was on the floor, not moving, and her body was covered in blood. Her clothes were torn, and it was clear that she had been fought with. The roommate called the cops right away because the scene was so horrifying. The first police officers who arrived were shocked by how bad the crime was. Rita had been severely beaten and choked. The wounds on her body showed that she had fought very hard to stay alive, but her attacker finally beat her. There were things all over the floor in the room, which made it look like Rita had been caught off guard by someone she didn't expect to be in her home. The police quickly made sure the scene was safe and started their probe. To try to figure out what had happened, they talked to the roommates and neighbors. But despite their best efforts, there were no leads right away. There were no fingerprints or signs of forced entry, and no one had seen or heard anything strange that night. It looked like the killer had disappeared without a trace. The town of Burlington was filled with fear as word spread that Rita had been killed. It was impossible for them to imagine that such a terrible crime could happen in their town. There were a lot of wild guesses when the rumors started to spread. Did Rita know the person who killed her? Someone who had been following her around? Or did someone just do something violent? Not having any answers made things even stranger. The death of Rita Curran was looked into by the Burlington Police Department. Detective Richard Crowley was in charge of the case. Crowley was a skilled detective who was known for being thorough and having good instincts. But right from the start, this case was different from any others he had worked on. One of the first things that the police did was look over the crime scene very carefully. Scientists who study crime scenes were called in to look for any clues the killer might have left behind. However, the scene didn't give us many hints. The killer was careful, as they didn't leave any fingerprints or DNA that could be used to identify them. Investigators were frustrated that there was no physical proof to help them find the person. They were looking for any clue that could lead them in the right direction. The cops also talked to anyone who may have seen or talked to Rita in the days before she was killed. Her friends, family, co-workers, and even her roommates were questioned more than once. But no one could give any information that seemed to be useful for the case. Rita didn't have any known enemies or relationships that were having problems, so it didn't seem like anyone would want to hurt her. Soon, the investigation grew to include a wider look for possible culprits. The cops went around the neighborhood talking to people to find anyone who might have seen something strange. They also checked out the crime records of people who lived in the area because Rita's murder could have been done by a traveler or drifter passing through town. They tried hard, but nothing worked. As the days turned into weeks, the story became less interesting. A piece of broken glass in Rita's bedroom had a partial fingerprint on it. It was one of the few pieces of evidence the cops had. But forensic science wasn't very advanced in 1971, so there was no quick way to connect the DNA to a specific person. It was a frustrating dead end that would keep the search going for years. The case stopped moving forward when summer turned to fall. There were no more leads, and the story stopped making the news. But for Rita's family, the pain of her death was still fresh, and the fact that they didn't have any answers made their pain even worse. They had a lot of questions and a strong sense that something was wrong. How could a young woman who was so smart and loving be taken so violently and no one be sued? Even though there were setbacks at first, the search for Rita Curran's killer was still not over. Detective Crowley and his team kept working on the case and wouldn't let it go away. They looked at old leads again, talked to witnesses again, and kept an eye out for any new information that might come up. A neighbor said he saw a man hanging out near Rita's apartment on the night of the murder, which was one of the best leads. The guy was said to be tall, have dark hair, and wear a light-colored jacket. However, the cops were unable to identify the person despite this description. For some reason, the lead finally went cold, which made the investigators even more angry. The case caught the attention of the FBI, who offered to help as the probe went on. Because of their help, the Burlington police were able to look into similar murders in other parts of the country in their search for the killer. Once more, though, no strong links were discovered. Through the years, Detective Crowley grew very angry about the case. He had solved a lot of tough cases in his job, but Rita's murder was still a mystery. That case kept coming back to haunt him, reminding him of the limits. There were more reports, interviews, and pieces of proof that didn't seem to lead anywhere in the case file as time went on. The fingerprint found at the scene was looked at again and again, but since it didn't match anything in the system, it stayed a tantalizing but useless hint. Rita's family was still very upset even though time had passed. As long as they worked with the cops and tried to keep the case in the public eye, they kept looking for answers. But as the years went by, hope started to fade. It looked more and more likely that no one would ever find Rita's killer. Finally, the case made progress in a way that no one could have seen coming. As investigative technology got better in the early 2000s, it gave people new hope that cold cases could be solved. DNA analysis had become an important part of crime investigations. With this new technology, many old cases that had not been solved were being looked at again. In 2004, the Burlington Police Department chose to use more up-to-date forensic techniques to look into the Curran case again. The piece of fingerprint that was found at the scene was looked at again, and this time detectives were able to get a DNA profile from it. This was a big deal because it meant that the killer might be able to be found through a match in the National DNA Database. The DNA was put into the computer, but there was no match right away. Even though it was disappointing, the detectives didn't give up hope. The database was always getting bigger, and it was possible that the killer's DNA would be added at some point. At the same time, the people and the media became more interested in the case again after it was looked at again. People interested in cold cases and real crimes started to pay attention to the Curran case, making sure it would stay in the news and not be forgotten. The case took another strange turn in 2014. William DeRoos, a man who lived in the same building as Rita at the time of her death, became a new suspect. DeRoos had been arrested before and was known to be aggressive. He also left the apartment building soon after Rita died, which made people think he had something to do with it. The cops started to look into DeRoos more deeply, and in 2017, they were able to get a DNA sample from a family member of him. The DNA profile from the crime scene was matched to this sample, and the results were clear. William DeRoos was a match. It took more than 40 years, but the murder of Rita Curran had finally been solved. People who had been following the case for a long time were both relieved and shocked by the news. DeRoos had been able to avoid justice for many years and had lived his whole life without ever being caught for his crime. But his secret was finally found out because the police didn't give up and analytical technology kept getting better. When the Rita Curran case was finally over, it put an end to a story that had been going around Burlington for more than 40 years. That being said, it also served as a warning of how violent crime changes communities, not just the victims and their families. The time when Rita's killer was identified was both sad and happy for her family. They had to wait so long for answers. They were glad to finally know the truth, but nothing could take away the pain of losing Rita or the years of grief and not knowing what to do after she died. The case had a huge impact on the detectives who worked so hard to solve it as well. Detective Crowley, who had been retired for a long time, was happy that the case was finally over, but sad that it had taken so long to get Rita Curran justice. For the younger agents who took over the case later on, it showed how important it is to keep looking for the truth no matter what. After 40 long years, William DeRoos was finally caught for Rita Curran's murder. The truth brought some relief, but her family still felt the deep pain of her loss.